Hi everyone, it's Geoff Hall with Around Town, and my guest today probably signifies around town more than anyone I know, because everywhere I go around town I run into this guy, and he's made it a point to get out and meet people. Representative Jim Arciero. Jim?
Jeff, thank you for
Thanks
having me
for coming on.
Yeah, no, it's been great. It's been a long time.
Well, Jim, tell us a little bit about, I know that you're kind of in the midst of a campaign, but who is Jim Arciero?
Yeah, well,
Let's go back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a hometown kid. You know, I grew up in Westford, grew up in this area. My parents moved to Westford from New York City in 1967. I have an older brother, Cletus Anthony Arciero, who was just visiting me this past weekend. He was a surgeon in the military for 26 years. He just recently retired, and he's in private practice as my older brother. Graduated from Westford Academy. I have an older sister, Susan, who I'm very proud of as well. She is a children's book illustrator.
Yeah, okay.
And well, she got married to someone in the Army as well, and she's out in the South. My brother's out in Atlanta. My parents have passed, and I've started my family here in Westford, in the town that I loved and the school system I went through. And
when did you graduate, Jim?
1993.
1993, okay. And you grew up in the Parker Village area of town.
I did, yeah. Banbury Drive. My parents moved to Wayne Road, and it's interesting. People always say to me, "Oh, you're a state representative. You're in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. You must have really been sort of a government nerd as a young person growing up." And not really. I didn't really think about politics too much in high school as much. I have a lot of, obviously, kind of a diverse amount of friends from different kind of cliques and groups, I think, growing up, and I think that served me well in politics. I was always able to relate to people on different walks of life, etc. But it wasn't until I went to UMass Dartmouth undergraduate that my sophomore year, somebody in my dorm told me, "Jim, you really, we need some people that you'd be pretty good at this to run for student senate." And I ran, and I didn't really campaign. I kind of didn't know what I was doing. And I tried to meet people, etc. I don't know if it was a fluke, but when you say, who is Jim Arciero? Well, I think his political persona was created in that student election that he didn't campaign on. and I won, I think I was middle of the pack of about 12 different student senators at the time, and I absolutely loved it. Yeah. I loved helping people. I loved finding ways to sort of navigate at that time through, the university system to help students. And that carried over when I graduated and looked for a job in politics.
You just hit upon something, Jim, that, when I was in office, and what inspired me, the same thing I think inspired you, to help people.
Sure. That's
why you get into this business, correct?
Fundamentally, that's what it's about for me. Some folks have different agendas, but for me, it's you have the ability, by being a representative in government, to effectuate positive change, and to really certainly help people on a whole host of problems. If it's constituent issues, if it's issues navigating through government, or it's a way that possibly you can leverage funding for your community that impacts your community in a positive way.
Well, Jim, okay, so you said you went to UMass Dartmouth, graduated in '97?
Yeah.
And where'd you go from there?
Coincidentally, we bring this up, huh? Well, let me backpedal a little bit. At first, I would say that what made me want to work in government or to run for office and to have that, that honor, if you will, was when I interned in Washington, D.C. So my brother was in med school at the time at the Uniformed Services School of Medicine, which was a military school. And I took the subway every morning. I ate out of the vending machines. It was an unpaid internship in Washington, D.C., and I worked for Congressman Barney Frank.
Oh, okay.
Who was the congressman from UMass Dartmouth in the Dartmouth area at the time. And I think that knowledge and that understanding of how a legislative office worked and what they did on a bigger scale inspired me to want to run for office. So now to your question. When I graduated UMass Dartmouth, it was August. I moved back home with my parents, and I wanted to get involved locally. What did the Tip O'Neill book, All Politics is Local? I had just recently read that book. Get involved in your community. Meet people who are interested in the same things that you're interested in terms of public service. And I recall I called you out of the blue from my college dorm, and you called me back, which I thought was impressive. And I remember Geoff Hall, the state representative from Westford, called my dorm room. And I was inquiring to see if I could help you in your race. And it was 1996. And I think you said, Jim, I'm unopposed. Have a great summer.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That was how it worked. Absolutely.
But I graduated, I was living at home, and I remember, this is a nice shout out to WestfordCAT. It was Channel 8 was the only channel that we had for local cable access at the time. And let's just say it was a little different than it is now. I think we're light years ahead in technology now than it was then. But some of the advertisements the advertisements would come on Channel 8 of things happening. I think they still do that here. And one was the Westford Academy Alumni Association was looking for members to be part of their board of directors. And I said, hey, All Politics is Local. Why don't I, inquire? I'm a proud WA graduate, and maybe I would, get involved with folks that are the movers and shakers of Westford, if you will. And I showed up at the first meeting, and I was the youngest person by about 65 years. And I think by the end of the meeting, I was immediately promoted to vice president, and which was, I think Mickey Crocker had a big hand in that. And I think you were at, if I got this right, Geoff, you were at a WA alumni dinner.
Well, let me pick it up from there, Jim.
I think that's where we're at, yeah.
Norm Harkins
Yep.
was the president. And he came to me, and he says, I got a young man here who really has an interest in government. Are you looking for any help in your office? And at the time, I was looking for an aide, somebody to do research. And I said, sure. I said, why don't we set up an interview? So that August, you came in and interviewed with me, and my office was the recommendation of Norm Harkins, and we hired you as a researcher for the Committee on State Administration. Yeah. And what's interesting, and those who've seen you around town have seen you with your aide, Jeff Tucker, who had been hired 2 months before. So you guys kind of grew up together.
Yeah, Jeff Tucker, so many people, he's probably right now, his face is turned completely red, and he's hiding from, the interview room. But no, Jeff is indispensable, as he was in your office. And I think the joke was when I ran for office and I won after you had retired from office, I think you said something like Jeff Tucker comes with the office.
Yeah.
Right? But no, certainly, it was August 18th, 1997 when I first started, and here we are.
But you went to
October 2018.
But there was a few years there, Jim. Okay, you worked for me until I think it was 2002. Your research, and one of the things I said is, keep your eyes open. Yeah. You don't want to be here forever. And you went to work for
the state senator.
Yeah, state senator. Well, before that,
Shannon O'Brien.
Shannon O'Brien, yes, state treasurer's office for a while.
So I essentially, I'll never forget it. And you couldn't control the salaries, Geoff, so I know that. No. But we weren't getting rich. But my first salary in 1997 at your office was $22,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I immediately, soon after that, applied for graduate school for public administration's master's with a concentration in state finances, and went to school at night at Suffolk and got my my master's degree, and soon after that I worked as an analyst for the state treasurer's office in cash management. Yeah. And soon after that I worked as the legislative director for the Senate Committee on Ways and Means.
Yeah,
and
for Senator Panagiotakis,
who was our state senator, but also was the chair of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, which is arguably one of the most powerful positions in the state.
The senator saw something in you, Jim. I mean, I know that we had a discussion, Senator Panagiotakis and I, and you were working on Shannon O'Brien's campaign at the time, and you were working hand in hand with Steve and his people, and he said, I want him after he leaves.
Yeah.
And so he hired you, and you worked for the senator until 2008, when I retired, and you ran for the office.
I did, yeah.
And won.
Yep.
And through your hard work. Jim, once again, I want to go back to why you or why I got into it. It was to help people. And these flyers have been coming in the mail.
Yeah.
The first one here talks
part of the
about
campaign.
veterans issues.
Yep.
Veterans issues, and you got George Bruno on this one and several things, but you've worked closely on veterans issues. You want to talk just a minute or so about that?
Certainly. I mean, with George Bruno, Sergeant Major in the United States Army, fully decorated veteran in Vietnam, and a good friend. And George, it's interesting when we talk about that picture, which was telling on Veterans Day. And the JFK quote, of course, it's there as well, is George Bruno was one of my scoutmasters at Troop 159.
Oh, wow.
So that's how far back we go.
By the way, you're an Eagle Scout.
I am an Eagle Scout, yeah. And so I still see George. George still attends Post 437's Eagle Scout Court of Honors. I still try to make as many as I can.
Yep.
I would have to say my district, some of my colleagues like to kid with me a little bit, and it's the fact that I think the 2nd Middlesex District, Chelmsford, Littleton, and Westford has more Eagle Scouts than anywhere in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'll tell you right now, we are Eagle Scout Central.
Oh, yeah.
There's probably not a weekend I'm not going to the Eagle Scout Court of Honor, and quite frankly, I'm proud to do it.
Yeah.
But I'm from a military family myself. My father was a Vietnam-era veteran.
Specifically what it did, just touch upon a few points, Jim, because I want to talk about a few other issues.
Certainly. Well, coming from a military family myself, it's a natural for me, and I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and that flyer particularly talked about some successes I've had.
Yep.
One was, working with veteran service officers locally here. Terry Stater is to make sure that we had 100% access for public housing for disabled veterans, which was passed and signed by the governor. Secondly, a commission on higher education to ensure that all of the benefits of the GI Bill are being fulfilled for veterans who need and deserve it.
Okay.
And lastly, Gold Star families. It started with a constituent from Littleton who wasn't getting the benefits and the needs she deserved as well, and we filed legislation to enhance the benefits for the Gold Star Families program.
Just so people, if you hear this Gold Star family, what's Gold Star mean?
Gold Star family is family members that are survivors of someone who has passed away or was killed in action.
In action,
in war or some sort of a conflict.
So once again, you've gone out to the community, met with people, listened to them, and came back as a legislator and try to find solutions.
And that's our job, really. Certainly,
Community first, then, is what you're saying. And this is another flyer that came, I just recently received. And community first, so which you've gone out, you've talked to people in the community, either the community leaders or individual leaders, whether it be, the defibrillator for the Little League, or any others. Talk a little bit about some of your accomplishments here, Jim.
Well, legislators, to me, as a state representative, as a legislator in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my number one job is to fight for my community and fight for every last dollar our communities deserve. And a big part of that also is, being accessible in the community and understanding what the needs are and moving
Being
forward.
a listener, Jim, right?
Moving forward to getting things done.
Yep.
And this particular picture kind of captured a little bit about how all in I am, really. And it's my daughter, my 2.5-year-old daughter Angelina, my wife, and a lot of my friends that are young families. Quite frankly, I mean, we live in Forge Village, Jeff, and right now we're seeing quite an influx of young families that want to come to Westford, come to this region because of the excellent school system, and it really is top notch. And that Community First is representative of things that I've been able to do in the community to enhance it.
Can you click off a few of those?
I certainly can. Again, we talked about Forge Village and the young families that are there, and this desire for a park. And I grew up swimming at Forge Beach,
Yeah.
and there was a playground dedicated to one of my fellow students who had passed away, Rich Culver, the Culver family.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a playground that was in need of rehab and complete reconstruction. So listening to a lot of the residents, especially the young families, especially myself too. I mean, I come down there with my daughter quite a bit to the beach after breakfast Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
And I was able to leverage $100,000 to start to do a rehab of the beach and especially the park.
And then just down the road a little bit, the day school.
Normandy Day School, went to middle school there. The year my brother was there was last year was North Middle, and there was Kevin Regan was my physical education teacher when I was younger. He was then later a very successful principal at Normandy Day and is retired, but took this campaign to create a new state of the art, if you will, and completely accessible playground at Normandy Day, and I did my part and worked on the team and was able to earmark $50,000 for the project.
The third thing that I know that has been a big issue with you is school safety. Jim, before we get into the school safety aspect of this, I'd like to bring in Superintendent Bill Olsen. I know who's someone you've collaborated with on trying to get to the bottom of this issue and move it forward. So let's take a break and bring in Bill Olsen, the Superintendent of Schools in Westford. Bill Olsen, Superintendent of Schools here in Westford. Bill, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Listen, Bill, you know, Jim and I were talking about his background, and then we got into some of the issues that have come up in his tenure and some of the things he's worked upon. But he says he worked closer with you on the issue of school safety.
Yes,
Jim, give a little background on what spurred you to get involved with this particular issue and dive into it head first.
Well, certainly I think not only here in Westford, across the state, nationally, people are just horrified at the tragedies that we saw in Newtown, Connecticut, in Parkland, Florida. And there's been discussion, certainly on the national level, about how to protect children at our schools and enhance school safety at the schools. And I think it's sort of, the anxiety sort of culminated when there was an incident in Westford.
Yep. Bill, you said before we were off the air, you talked a little bit about the anxiety level in Westford, particularly after Parkland.
That's correct.
And the incident in Westford. Talk a little bit about that and what you and town did.
Well, as I have mentioned in the past to Jim, after the Parkland shooting, and then after we had unfortunately a staff member who had a weapon in his trunk on school property, the anxiety level in town elevated to a point where I have never seen. And so we held a public forum on school safety that I spoke at was last March for about 90 minutes. I think it was well received. We had probably between 150 and 200 residents there, including some of our students, and I congratulate them for wanting to be involved in whatever discussion we have on school safety. And so I wanted to outline to the public what we've done to address the issue of school safety, some of the incremental steps that we have taken, some of the things that we still need to do and do a better job on, particularly in the area of understanding people who have mental health issues and how we service them in a more effective manner. So it was a very well attended, very well received forum. Had a lot of facts and information for and worked well with Jim on that presentation, with Chief Tom McEnany and Chief Joe Targ on it also. Yeah.
Jim, but this wasn't your first involvement. I mean, you had been looking at this issue as a legislator prior to this, am I right?
Certainly, yeah. The discussion on the national and the state level was how to keep our kids safe, keep our schools protected, to enhance some of the infrastructure, if you will. And a lot of the discussions also were about arming teachers? How do we have additional school resource officers? On both sides of the aisle, I think people were trying to figure out a way to get our arms around this issue and prevent these tragedies from happening. And I think it was soon after the forum at the Stony Brook School, I sat down with Bill and Chief Tom McEnany about the whole idea of increasing school resource officers. And I think that's something that came out of that forum. Is that correct, Bill?
That's correct.
And it was that, affordability.
Yep, that's always a question.
Being able to have a school system hire additional school resource officers. Right now, there isn't a school resource officer for each school here in Westford.
Correct.
And I think parents and students alike were bringing up the idea of school resource officers. So I credit Bill and Tom McEnany with the idea that let's look outside the box and see if we could file legislation to allow retired state and local police officers to work as school resource officers. Okay. Number one, currently under Massachusetts general laws, there's a limitation to how long a retired police officer can work.
Okay.
And it's limited to 960 hours, which equates to about 120 days. In a school year is about 180 days.
That's correct.
So by changing the legislation to allow retired police officers to work full-time, it's cost-effective because you're not paying into a pension system or health care. These are individuals that are retired. So there's flexibility financially, but also you have a highly trained individual that knows the community, knows the school, and I think most importantly, Bill, and if you could sort of talk a little bit about this, there's a process that Chief McEnany and yourself would go through when you hire an SRO in a school.
That's correct. First of all, they have to go through SRO training. There's a specific training course, but also we interview them carefully to make sure that we get the right person in the job, because it's all about, whether it's school safety or anything else in life, it's about the ability to connect with other people.
Absolutely.
You know, I always say to whatever audience I speak to on the topic of school safety, it's about people, first of all, and their ability to either connect or not connect. And you find that those schools that remain the safest throughout the country, for the most part, have staff who are interested in the students, respect them, want to understand their needs, want to understand what's going on in their lives, and I will also say that we pay attention to adults also, because this is not a condition that it is exclusive to students. We all have difficult times in life. Some of us respond better than at other times, and so it's understanding what's going on with our students, and understanding what's going on with our staff, understanding what the behavioral indicators are. Has there been a change in demeanor, in attendance, in the friends that they have, in their temperament, in their eating habits, all things that, by connecting with students, you begin to understand a little bit more thoroughly whether or not there's something going on in their lives. And you know, continuing on with preparation, response, and recovery. It's all part of the school safety process and procedure. And when we talk about connecting, here's where Jim has made it a point to connect with us about the school safety officer issue. It makes a tremendous amount of sense. And hopefully it will pass through the legislature at some point in time.
You actually went down and testified before, which committee would it have been?
That's correct.
Yeah, the the Joint Committee on Education.
Okay, okay.
So myself, Bill, and Chief McEnany sort of told our local story to the members of the legislature.
Yeah.
And you crafted legislation, and it hasn't passed at this point, Jim, but you're hoping that as the next session goes forward, that this might be something that other legislators will grab onto. Am I correct?
Certainly, and we had over 50 co-sponsors, both sides of the aisle, both Republican and Democrat, had a tremendous amount of momentum. But I think as a former legislator, sometimes late file legislations and the clock runs out. But we're very energized if things work out, to move forward with this legislation in the upcoming session as well.
Okay.
And it's important to know also that it was not a mandate. Jim did not craft the legislation such that communities would be mandated to hire retirees. It was an option. It's an option that would be available to all of us.
One, I guess, doesn't fit all, the old saying.
That's correct.
And that some communities would feel better if, using this legislation. Yeah. A couple of things, Jim, I know that as a result of this, so were there other legislators in other districts that came to you about this?
Oh, certainly. There's a lot of discussion about school safety. It has been, but obviously sometimes tragic events spur that discussion, unfortunately. And locally here, I think we, certainly the issue, the forum in Stony Brook spurred more action in this area and more discussion. The Westford School Department, Chelmsford and Littleton have been very proactive. I've met with the chiefs and the superintendents on this issue and walked through their schools, quite frankly, looking at other ways to enhance public safety and enhance the infrastructure. And one of them, one of those issues was we had Peter Ostrowski, who is the fire marshal for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and myself and Bill and Chief McEnany met with him specifically about these interlocking devices, which would add an additional feature for classrooms to keep our kids safe in case of a tragedy may have occurred. And Bill, I think you talk a little bit about that because there's an issue that you brought to my attention.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you, Jim, for arranging that meeting. We wanted to talk with the State Fire Marshal locally, and we were able to do that. We haven't made the progress as of yet in having the state allow us to use certain door lockdown devices. See, right now, we go through training procedures. We use what's called an ALICE methodology, and it informs the students and the staff of what procedures to take in the event of an intruder. But the most crucial element of ALICE is allowing us to lock down the doors securely. And there are a number of products on the market, but they have not been approved by the State Fire Marshal's Office and the Bureau of Architectural Access, the Architectural Access Board in the state. And so that's what Jim is working on with us and other local community leaders to see if we can break down that barrier of disallowing these door lockdown devices. You see, with the modern day school buildings, all of the materials have to be at least a 2-hour fire rated material. So there's not going to be any immediate combustion throughout the school.
I didn't mean to cut you. We're running low on time. If there's anything that we've learned before I stop here, is that your job doesn't just include going down and taking a vote. It means getting out in the community. And I want to thank you both for coming on and sharing this. See you around town.